Today's video is brought to you by the Modern Gun School. This is not the other place that you've heard online that is cool with taking your entire GI Bill and running with it. This is an accredited online university. Whether you just want to learn a few things or you want to break into a career in the firearms industry, check them out at Modern Gun School, and let's hop into the video. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching the VSO Gun Channel. My name is Kurt Hallstrom. I'm your host as always. And today we're going to be talking about short-barreled rifles. And specifically, we're going to be doing a reference piece on the SHORT Act. And for those of you who are not paying attention, the SHORT Act is a provision of proposed law that would amend the National Firearms Act. The National Firearms Act is a provision of law that was passed in 1934 that places pretty much nonsensical regulations on various classes of firearms. And this was originally created to go after machine guns and pistols, handguns. But during the drafting process of the legislation, the Congress people ended up with cold feet, and they decided that, you know what, if we go after possibly one of the most popular types of weapons in the United States, not only will that get smacked down, but we're probably going to lose re-election if we do that. So they decided to not go after the handgun, and instead they ended up with this kind of like weird, kind of like limbo status for these guns that were kind of like in the middle of a rifle and a handgun. For instance, on the board here we have a pistol and a registered short barrel rifle. You'll see that those don't look all that different, especially when we take a regular rifle and throw it up on the wall, or if we were to take a handgun and throw it up on the wall. Obviously, there is a big difference between this and the other things that you see on the wall. The difference is, paperwork-wise or legally, for these two guns are drastically different. The National Firearms Act predates what we would possibly call the standard background check system of the NICS, the National Instant Check System, by over 60 years. And if you were to, I guess, look at it from a benevolent eye, you would say that you could sort of understand they didn't have the technology to do it at the time, why they did what they did. But when you really dig into the histories, it turns out that it was a much, much more malevolent perspective that the lawmakers at the time were taking when it came to infringing on people's God-given and inalienable rights and enshrined in our Constitution, literally the second thing that they wrote. I filmed this part like 3 times, and it turns out that this just keeps blowing out the camera and making it look weird. So whenever you purchase any of the following guns, a shotgun, this gun, or this gun in the United States, you must fill out one of these, which is a firearms transaction record. This directly plugs into the National Instant Check System, which plugs into the back ass of the FBI, and they return a response to your dealer within minutes on whether or not you have anything that would disqualify you from being able to purchase a firearm in the United States. This applies to all of those guns, even the registered short barrel rifle. That must be filled out. But in addition to this, if you want to purchase this gun, you must fill out an additional Form 4, duplicate copies of that form, duplicate mug shots, duplicate fingerprint cards, and $200 tax. That then goes on a centralized registry that may or may not be secure, to be completely honest. It's supposed to be a tax return, it's supposed to be confidential, but somehow or another, various rogue elements in the United States media seem to be able to gain access to it at will. The difference between this gun and this gun is roughly 2 inches of barrel. The difference between this gun and this gun is this piece of plastic and this piece of plastic, as well as the relevant engraving that must be done to this gun once it is a registered short barrel rifle. So there's an additional thing that must happen on the part of the owner that shows how it was registered so that it can be later identified for whatever purpose, even though we know that for the most part, they're used in a statistical 0% of crime. When it comes to the effectiveness of these weapons, there is really no difference. In fact, I would argue that since this one is chambered in .308 and this one is chambered in .300 blackout, and I will have the relevant data on screen for you to see that, the .308 is actually considerably more lethal than the .300 blackout, this being a registered gun, this not being a registered gun. The penalty for inadvertently taking this piece and putting it on that gun is 10 years in prison and $250,000 fine. And under the Biden administration, activist elements of our government used those facts to abuse millions of gun owners across the United States. They tried to write rules through executive fiat, which means that they were just sort of making it up as they go along to force citizens to register their weapons outside of any mandate from Congress. That's not how it's supposed to work, and passage of the Short Act would treat all of these weapons the same. They would get the exact same background check. They would get the exact same regulatory status in that they would all be treated as either rifles or pistols. There would be no more central registration, which is constitutionally questionable. And there would be no more capacity for rogue elements of our government or rogue regimes, for that matter, to persecute otherwise peaceable citizens that are just constitutionally exercising their rights. The provisions for the National Firearms Act can be found in the tax code. This was instituted as a tax. And the reason that it was instituted as a tax is Congress recognized that under no other authority could it possibly impose these kind of regulations. The Commerce Clause is all they had. The stated intent for this was to go after elements of organized crime that would not likely be acquiring those tax stamps. Fast forward almost a century, and we have a whole class of malum prohibitum crimes, crimes that have no victim, crimes that are crimes simply because the government says they are crimes that are being used to abuse its citizens. Because this is a tax, and the registration is tied to the payment of a tax, this can be removed through the reconciliation process. Passage of the Short Act would ensure that this kind of evil never happens again in our country, and it is something that should be a high priority for any lawmaker that is looking to draft any kind of legislation surrounding the Second Amendment. And it is the next movement that must occur if we are to restore constitutionality to our laws in this country. Any questions, go ahead and pop them in the comment section down below. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully we'll see you in another video here at the VSO Gun Channel.